Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome yang berbahagia RMC Deputy Directors, our invited speaker, Dr. John Richard Pasley, RMC professors, Deputy Dean of the Faculty, as well as all distinguished guests. Please welcome. Please welcome to our sharing session on United Kingdom Research Funds 2024, organized by Research Management Centre, University Tun Hussein on Malaysia. And please be informed that our session will be in hybrid form. We have both physical and virtual participants for the session. So before we start our session, I will read some safety precautions during an emergency as a procedure. Please be informed that we are at conference room level 1 of the research building, University Tun Hussein on Malaysia. So the exit door is on your right side. If there is an emergency or if the bell rings, please be calm and do not be panic. Leave all your belongings and move in an orderly manner. Please use the stairs to exit the building and wait for the instructions and further announcements made by our safety license officers. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope today will bring us more knowledge with fruitful information, which will be presented by our distinguished speaker. And with that, I would like to invite Dr. Saizal Mursidi bin Mat Mustam, our RMC Deputy Director, to give his welcoming and opening remarks. Please welcome.
Okay, thank you to our moderator, Chairman Shahidah. Assalamualaikum and very good morning to our invited speaker, Dr. John Richard Pasley from the School of Physics, Engineering and Technology, University of York. Welcome to UTHM. We are happy to have you today. So to all the audience, thanks for joining us on sharing our today's sharing session. So we hope that from this sharing session, we can benefit or we can get information on the available United Kingdom Research Fund. So please ask question. And to all the community, thank you for making this event successful. Once again, thank you to our speaker for being for his willingness to be our speaker for today's sharing session. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saizal Mursidi bin Mat Mustam, for his welcoming remarks. Right, ladies and gentlemen, our session today will focus on the sharing of United Kingdom research funds by the speaker and hope that it will give fruitful information and ideas for all the researchers, especially in UTHM. Without any delay, I would like to invite Dr. John Richard Pasley from the School of Physics, Engineering and Technology, University of York, United Kingdom. Please.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm looking forward to talking to you all today. First of all, of course, I need to share my slides. So, okay, thank you very much indeed. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm just going to mute my audio on my laptop.
Yeah, I can hear you clearly.
Okay. Because otherwise I can kind of hear myself whispering back at myself. Okay, right. Thank you very much for inviting me. I think we're now ready to begin. So actually what I'm going to be talking to you about, I will talk about potential for funding from the UK, but that wasn't actually exactly the entirety of what I was asked to talk about. So I was asked, first of all, to introduce my group and my department at the University of York. And then once I've done that, I will move on to talk about research funding opportunities in the UK. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm going to start off by describing the institute within the University of York where I work, which is the York Plasma Institute. Then I'm going to talk about the broader school within which I work, which is the School of Physics, Engineering and Technology. Finally, I'm going to talk to you, so it's probably about, this talk is about 26 slides long. the introduction to my group and my university. That's about 13, 14 slides. And then the rest of this is going to be talking about research, potential research sources for working with UTHM. Okay, right. So the York Plasma Institute, where I work, and so I'm a plasma physicist. I work on nuclear fusion. It's something I've been doing for over 25 years now. So that's my field of research. I'm one of the main people who does this kind of research in the United Kingdom. The University of York is one of a few groups here in the United Kingdom. I'm not in the United Kingdom anymore, so I'm not here, but one of a few groups in the United Kingdom that does a lot of fusion science. The others are Imperial, Belfast, Warwick, and Glasgow. So it's about 5. So I work for the York Plasma Institute, so that falls within. I'm going to stand up because I don't normally ever give talks sitting down. So if this laser works, yeah, okay. So we sit within this group, which is the Plasma Infusion Science Technologies group. So let me move my bag out of the way a bit so I can kind of pace around. Okay, so I'm going to start off then by telling you a little bit about the York Plasma Institute, which is where I work and what we do. So the Plasma Institute was founded in 2012. It's funded by EPSRC, which is the main funding body that funds plasma science within the United Kingdom. So this is the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. And we have what we call a doctoral training center, which supports a large number of PhD students. It's typically around 10 to 12 PhD students a year for a period of 5 to 6 years. So it's a very large amount of funding. It's on the order of around about £6 million, or about 35 million ringgit. So it's a large doctoral training project that we have. We also have an MSc in fusion energy, which is something that we use to enable graduates who have maybe not been to a university which specialize in fusion to actually shift into the fusion sector. Okay, so our research group is divided into 3 areas. So there's magnetic confinement fusion. We are the leading group, undoubtedly, in the United Kingdom for magnetic confinement fusion research. We collaborate very strongly with the Culham Science Centre and the STEP program. So these are very large fusion projects in the United Kingdom. The area that I work in is inertial confinement fusion and laser plasma interactions. So you may have heard that not last December, but the December before last, we achieved ignition by nuclear fusion at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in Northern California. So that's the area of work that I am involved in. And we contribute both ideas and also scientists. Sometimes we're involved in experiments at the National Ignition Facility. So that's the exact thing that I work on, but I realize that that's not probably what you're interested in today. So I'm not going to kind of bang on too much about what it is that I actually do personally in terms of research. The other group, I said there were 3, and there are, within my research team, works on what we call low temperature plasmas. So this is generally semiconductor manufacturing technologies, so ways of generally increasing the number of transistors you can put on a chip. That's essentially what we're trying to do, but using low temperature plasma fabrication. Sorry, by the way, for stopping for a drink beforehand, but it pretty much just, and also, by the way, sorry for being a bit late, but we had some travel disturbances coming up from JB this morning, so that's why I'm a little bit late. I'm sorry about that. So I'm having some coffee just to make sure that my throat doesn't give out halfway through this presentation. Right, okay. So they're the 3 different areas in the York Plasma Institute. But actually, we investigate plasma science, well, we investigate fusion not just from a scientific perspective at York. We also look at other aspects. So, for instance, government regulation is very important. You know, we're dealing with radioactive materials. We're also generating radioactive material. You know, fusion is not the same as fission. So it's not got the same risks as conventional nuclear power, but there are still risks involved. There are still hazardous materials involved. And because so far there aren't actually any fusion power stations in existence, there's a large amount of legislative work that needs to be put in place to actually enable such power plants to work within a formal legislative environment. We also do some work with the engineering people on robotics, because these are highly radioactive environments. They're not environments in which you can have people going in with like wrenches and drills and things. So all of the maintenance works is actually carried out by robots. So we do quite a lot of work in robotics. And also on the social sciences side, because as you're all probably well aware, nuclear power has not got a very good reputation. So we are also looking at, first of all, well, what went wrong with conventional nuclear power in terms of, you know, the reputation that it has with the public, because, you know, it's widely perceived as being very dangerous. Whereas if you actually look at the number of people who have died due to, you know, nuclear power stations, etc., it's far, far less than with coal, oil, gas. There are far more accidents involving those power sources than there are with nuclear. But all anyone thinks about is Chernobyl and Fukushima, right? Even though actually neither of these accidents really killed a very large number of people by comparison. Okay, we also do an awful lot of work in education, from the doctoral level right down to going and talking to schools. And we are the leading player in education in fusion science in the whole of Europe, if not the world. Okay, right. So that's kind of told you about my group and what I actually am involved in myself. However, the School of Physics, Engineering and Technology also does quite a number of other things. So I'm going to briefly run through each of these activity areas. It's just a slide on each area. I'm not going to spend like 10 slides on each, because then we'll be there all day. But I'll spend a minute or so on each of these, just telling you briefly what each of these groups do, so that we can potentially explore synergies between UTHM and York in terms of potential future projects. Because although I'd very much like to work with some of you or all of you on fusion, probably most of you are not very interested in fusion, but you may be interested in other things that we do in the School of PET. So I'd like to tell you what it is that we actually do, so that you can think, actually, I'm interested in that, or not. Right, okay. So first of all, the first group, communication technologies. So this actually is, this is a funny group in that it kind of covers two things which are in some senses similar, but in some senses completely different, because it looks at both audio technologies in terms of communication, but also in terms of electromagnetic technologies. And it's funny actually, there's a lot of overlap in terms of some of the facilities and what they're called, but they're actually completely different facilities. So you can have an anechoic chamber for audio signals, which basically means a room that the walls don't reflect the sound back. And you can also have a similar thing for electromagnetic signals. And they're also called anechoic, but it's for EM. And you get an equivalent to this, which is called a reverberation chamber, which does the exact opposite, which basically means that the walls actually reflect any radiation falling upon them. And this is very useful for testing. We've all got electromagnetic devices, I suspect, in this room. We've all got mobile phones. And it's really important, actually, when you're developing new technologies that rely upon electromagnetic communication, that if you put a bunch of those devices in the same room, they continue to work. And so some of the facilities that they have, so this reverberation chamber in the EM lab is designed to explore this kind of interference between devices to understand whether they actually work in a practical real world environment. So anyway, so they do acoustics and acoustic sources, and they also do EM communication and testing in this group. Okay, condensed matter and materials physics. This is a very large group in the physics department. There are 70 people working at the PhD student and higher level just in this one group alone. Although it's worded slightly confusingly. I took each of these descriptions from the individual groups, by the way. So if the formatting is not identical, that's why. They look, I mean, one of their main focuses is in magnetic materials. So they've done a lot of the work which actually underpins hard drive development, for instance, with Seagate and some of the large US fabricators of hard disks. They also look at magnetic liquids. They look at nanostructures and actually developing nanostructures. So it's quite a broad group, and they do both experiment and theory. So actually some of the world leaders in, for instance, computational DFT are based at the University of York. Sorry, I'm going to have some more of my coffee. Right, okay, so that's the condensed matter and materials physics group, which we sometimes just call the solid state group. Then there is healthcare engineering. They do a range of different things. I always think this is what I call the Star Wars medicine group, because if you've ever seen the Star Wars movies where they have like robots going in and diagnosing things and kind of sensors that they kind of waft over people and know exactly what's wrong with them, that's basically exactly what this group is trying to develop, right? So it's using what we call medical robotics, which can mean a range of different things. I mean, one of the most obvious things is we are very much at the limit in terms of surgery of what surgeons, like human surgeons, can actually do, right? Because, you know, we all have fingers, we can hold tools, but there are operations where that's not really enough. You need a higher level of precision. You know, there are some operations, for instance, where, you know, one false move is going to really cause a lot of damage. Full spine replacement, for instance, you can have a spinal transplant of the whole spine. That's something that may actually be much better done by a robot than by a human being because of the risk of damaging the spinal column in the process. Then there's also all kinds of computer-assisted clinical diagnosis, ones that actually work, and unlike some of the ones that have come into the news recently and attracted legal action. So that's not what we do. We actually do credible computer-assisted diagnosis and a range of other things. Obviously, this isn't my area, so the extent to which I can really kind of talk about it is somewhat limited, but I think hopefully you get the idea. We do a lot of work on intelligent systems and robotics. This, if I were to liken it to a movie, the Terminator movies spring to mind here. So we have artificial intelligence and also robot self-replication. So robots that can actually replicate themselves. A rather scary idea in my view. But anyway, that's what this group actually do. They also work on artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I think you all have a fair idea of what that means. Then we have nuclear physics. One could say one of the more old-fashioned fields of physics, but what they do in the nuclear physics group is pretty cutting edge. So they're looking at things like the types of nuclear structure that can exist in the center of neutron stars, where you get very exotic nuclear states occurring at very high densities. And also more conventional nuclear physics, where they're actually trying to generate new nuclei here on Earth and examining their properties, their half-life, scattering, and all the rest of it. Okay, physics of life. This is a group which looks at the kind of boundary between biology and physics. So it's looking at individual cell processes very often, using quite sophisticated physics diagnostics. So things like X-ray free electron lasers, for instance, to actually freeze biological processes on an at-a-second timescale so that you can actually examine what is happening in a very step-by-step fashion. Right, have I run out of groups? Is that the last one? No, there's one more. So there is quantum science and technologies. So again, there's quite a strong overlap between this group and solid state physics. So they also do quite a lot of density functional theory, for instance, so theoretical solid state physics. But also there's a fair amount of things like quantum computational work. One area which is really just the area that I happen to know a little bit about because of some of the teaching that I do, is this development of what they call squeezed light. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, but the Heisenberg uncertainty principle basically says there is a limit to how accurately you can measure something. If you can measure one aspect of that thing very accurately, then the degree to which you can accurately measure other properties of that thing diminish. So squeezed light is basically light which doesn't actually have the properties of normal coherent light. So it doesn't actually look like normal laser light, but instead it actually, by compressing the number of phase states available for an individual photon, it allows you to get very much more accurate measurement of, for instance, position by reflection, which is very useful in the latest gravitational wave detectors like LIGO. And it's actually developments in squeezed light that are enabling the detection of many more gravitational wave sources in the past couple of years than were detectable previously. It's the fact that we're actually able to make this special type of light. Right, okay, so that's enough banging on about physics. Hopefully I haven't bored you all to death if you're not physicists. So I'd now like to tell you about the funding landscape in terms of collaboration between the University of York and UTHM. So there's really three different categories of funding here that I want to talk about. And the big one is the middle one. So I've got one slide on the first thing and one slide on the last thing and about 7 or 8 slides on the middle one, because that's actually the most dominant thing. So the first thing I want to tell you about, which you may well already be pretty familiar with because these things have been around a long time, are Royal Society travel grants, or as they're more formally called, international exchange grants. These are just travel grants. They're very straightforward. They don't allow for large amounts of funding, but they're quite easy to get. So in terms of having academics, postdoctoral researchers going back and forth between Malaysia and the UK to start on projects, these are quite useful. They don't require very much effort to actually get one. The form is relatively short, but the amounts of money are limited. And this is really just to support travel between countries. Okay, so moving on then to the big one, and this is actually a change. So I'm not sure how up to date you keep with developments in the United Kingdom, but the International Research Funding Platform in the UK transitioned dramatically last year from the old system to the new system. The new system is called International Science Partnerships Fund. Now, previously, you may have heard of something called the Newton Fund. There was this scheme called the Newton Unku Omar. That is probably not going to happen anymore because it has essentially been replaced by this new funding route. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how these work. And also there is some good news, because it turns out that yesterday, like literally yesterday on Monday the 8th, one of the participants in this program has put out a call for grants, which is, as you'll see, fairly specifically directed at UK, Malaysia collaborative research. There are a few other eligible countries, but not many. Okay, so hopefully, I mean, maybe you're all like super up to date and you're all like, oh yeah, I knew that yesterday when the call came out, but at least I was kind of excited by it. So hopefully you will be too. Anyway, so let me tell you about the ISPF more generally. So as I said, this is basically the way. There aren't any other ways. This is it. This is how the UK government is supporting international collaborative research from now on. It replaces things like the Newton Fund. So those things, they're basically gone, right? Rather confusingly, the websites are still there and say they will be updated when new calls come out. But there aren't going to be any new calls because they've been replaced. Hopefully they will soon take the website down to make this less confusing, because we now have these ISPS. And these are quite large amounts of money for international research. These numbers, of course, you need to multiply by about 6 to go to ringgits. I'm not sure how familiar you are with GBP as a currency, but this is going to be about 700 million ringgits, and this is going to be about 12 million ringgits. So these, 1.2 billion ringgit. So these are large amounts of money, okay? And these funds are shared by, and also this is over a relatively short period of time. So this is for fun. This money is to be spent before 2025. Okay, so this is a significant quantity of research funding that is available. Now that all sounds fantastic. What's maybe a little bit less fantastic is how you actually get at that money. Because what happens is that the government gives that money to all of these separate organizations, and then each of those organizations has its own funding calls according to their interests, which is a little bit exasperating because there isn't like a central organization which is going to say, okay, these are all the different schemes which are open to Malaysia. You actually have to look at all of these individual organizations and see which is offering funding that could be used to support your research. And unsurprisingly, the vast majority of them aren't currently offering any funding that would support at least research with the School of Pet and UTHM. However, one of them is the British Council. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that call. But in general, in future, so all of this stuff, if you just search for International Science Partnership Fund on Google, you'll find all this information. You'll find this list of organizations, and you can just periodically go through and see if there's anything that might fall in your area. Clearly, if what you work on is what I work on, like high power lasers and shooting things with big lasers and doing fusion, then the Met Office is probably not going to be supporting that research because they do weather. UK Atomic Energy Authority, you might think would be supportive, but actually they mainly do magnetic confinement fusion. So for physics in general, it's probably this one and this one. So the British Council and the NPL. And if you're actually working on magnetic confinement fusion, which no one in this room is, I don't think, then UK AEA. Right. Now, it gets slightly more complicated. So I'm going to try and explain how this works. So the fund itself, so the ISPF, has 4 different schemes, if you like, within which it is supporting international research. So there is the Resilient Planet thread. So this is to develop renewable technologies, green technologies, that kind of thing. There is the Transformative Technologies thread, which is really about just doing any kind of technological development that will move us to a more sophisticated future. There's the Healthy People, Animals and Plants, which is essentially a reaction to COVID. And then Tomorrow's Talent, which is trying to make science more inclusive, to increase the participation of underrepresented groups. In the UK, that would be women. Looking at this room, maybe not here so much in Malaysia, but definitely in the UK. Okay, so that's kind of slightly confusing because now you've got all these different organizations and then you've got these 4 threads. So the way that this works is like this. Each of these organizations puts out a call, and then when you are writing, it may be that the call is specific to one of these things, but normally it won't be. Normally, as part of your funding application, you have to say which of these 4 things your work is relevant to and justify why it is relevant to that particular thread of research. So, for instance, if you're working on developing new solar panels, you've got a pretty good case for putting it in the Resilient Planet fund, and you can probably make a decent argument as to why that is going to help make the planet more green, right? If what you're doing is something like, I don't know, theoretical physics of quantum spin states, you may have to try quite a lot harder to actually find how it ties in with one of these things. But that's, of course, commonly the task of the academic to sell their work in terms of what is fashionable at the present time. Anyway, as I said, the British Council currently, and it's very current because it came out yesterday, has a call out as part of this ISPF. And I've got the exact call wording on the next page so you can see it, but just a kind of an executive summary. First of all, Malaysia is listed as one of the eligible countries, and there aren't many, as you'll see on the next page. You can find more information on the council website, including all the application documents. By the way, just to be absolutely clear, I'm not expecting if you decide to apply for this, that you apply with me personally, right? It will be very nice if you apply with someone from the School of Pet at the University of York, but I'm just providing this as information to you if you want to collaborate with the university in the UK in general, right? And I perfectly understand that there are areas of work where it would make more sense to collaborate with a different university, okay? So don't think I will be offended or I'm going to come back like in a year's time, be like, why did you put in an application to work with the University of Bristol? You know, it's fine, okay? It's understood, right? Okay, right. There is a reasonable amount of, so this is what we in the UK would call seed corn level funding. So this is not big money, but it's enough money that you can actually potentially do something, okay? The idea is that this will then lead to future applications, probably to national research councils, okay? So in other words, the idea is you apply for this much money from the ISPF, and then if that works successful, it generates publications, it gives you a basis to apply to your national research funding councils for larger amounts of money to support ongoing research. Okay. And as I say, well, I didn't say this actually, it came out yesterday and the deadline is the 5th of March. So there's quite a lot of time to actually put something together. This is the exact wording of the call. The main thing that I would like you to notice here is this line here. Okay, there's not many countries in that list. Okay, and it's not like one of these countries is China or India, which is going to completely swamp the applications. Okay, so you've got Egypt, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Turkey, and Vietnam. That's it. They are the only countries that are eligible to put in applications in this call. Okay, so hopefully this is useful. Hopefully you can find something you'd like to do with the UK university. If it happens to be the University of York, please do actually at least approach me first so that I can be an introduction agency, assuming it's not actually with me, right? So that the email doesn't, if you like, come completely out of the blue from people who the individuals concerned may well not be familiar with, okay? So I'm very happy to do that. And indeed, with UK universities in general, I mean, if it's not something we do at York, I may well be able to put you in touch with someone in the UK who can help you. Okay, so I'm not going to read this out. You can find it on the website, but some key points here. So the idea is to initiate new research activities. Okay, new research activities doesn't just mean it doesn't mean it has to be something that you've never done before, because obviously that's unrealistic. You're not going to suddenly write a research proposal to work in a completely new area. That doesn't make sense. What this really means is new research activity in terms of partnerships. So a new research activity essentially means, rather than just doing, say, something here or with a local collaborating university here in Malaysia, you're launching a new collaboration with a group in the UK. So that's what this is intended to support. It doesn't have to be like totally new stuff that you've never done before. That's not what these words mean. You can also use it to develop existing collaborations. Now, although I've been here several times now, we don't really even have a research collaboration as it stands. So both of these points could, to some extent, be argued, but probably more the first one. But if you have an existing collaboration, you can use this money to develop that. This next one, so encourage collaborations to work with non-academic organizations and individuals. This is often thinking about trying to bring in industry into collaborations. So this is probably not something that's essential, but it can always, if there is some kind of industrial interest, for instance, let's say Petronas is interested in this, and you can get them to write a letter of support, that's only going to make your application stronger. Okay, well, that's about it on that. Is that useful? Okay, right, so the only other type of funding really that is specifically intended to support joint activities is private funding. So for instance, I know that Petronas is currently working with and Imperial College London on fusion, because that's my area. Petronas and other large corporations in Malaysia may also be interested in working with the University of York on things, whether it's fusion or something else. It's definitely an avenue worth exploring. Now, something I haven't really covered in this talk, but it is worth saying, the idea of a lot of this funding is to get things started. The numbers are not particularly big here. I mean, when we think about a large research grant in the UK, we're typically thinking of something around the £5 to £15 million level. And I don't know what you think of here in terms of a large amount of funding, but you're probably looking at, you know, sub-million ringgit funding and thinking that's not very much. The idea of most of this international funding is to get things going, to the point that you can then apply to your local research council, or your partner in the UK can apply to their research council for larger amounts of money and still keep you involved, right? Now, in terms of the finances and how that works, that varies according to the exact research council and their rules. But there is certainly the potential for there to be support, financial support even from these larger research council grants. But that's not specifically what that funding is for, which is why I haven't really talked about it here. Right, okay, are there any questions? Anyone?
So John, I have one question.
Sure.
Thinking
Yeah.
the idea. Is it we must respect to the interests of the UK government or just of our part?
Ah, right, okay.
You get my point,
Yeah, I get your point. So basically, these funds are coming from the UK government, right? So yes, therefore, if you want to get money from the UK government, it has to tie in with their interests, right? They're not interested in doing anything that isn't going to be to some extent self-serving. However, the point of these funds is that it would help both organizations, so the organization in Malaysia and the organization in the UK. Now, there are equivalent funding, and I haven't talked about this because you already know about it, right? You've got, for instance, MITE here in Malaysia, and you've got your own national research funding bodies. But obviously, I'm not going to give you a talk about that because you know far more about it than I do, right? And then it goes the other way round in that, you know, if we want to do something collaboratively funded by MITE, for instance, then we've got to satisfy their interests. But here, because the money flows from the UK, then yes, you have to satisfy the UK government interests.
I think that's all.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
We have one question from online.
Okay.
Okay, question from Professor Rosiati. The ISPF is an online application for seeking the funding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's interested with the healthcare engineering domain for collaboration. Can you provide person in charge or researcher for this area?
Yeah, sure. What I would say is please just email me and I will link you up with the appropriate person at the University of York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe RMC will share
Yes,
Dr. John's email.
by all means.
All
Yeah.
right.
Any other questions?
Is there any other questions from the participants?
One more.
Yes.
Because we are Malaysian Tarikh district.
Yeah.
And in this district, we have plenty of background of people, especially in geology.
Yeah.
So in order to gather all the people to do one proposal, yeah, one solid proposal.
That isn't normally what you would do. When you're applying for funds in the UK, you do what makes sense to get the job done. If you try and include everyone, you're going to end up with a proposal that looks ill thought out, almost certainly. So you pick a very limited group of people that you think need to be involved, right? You don't try and be inclusive in that way. When it's talking about inclusivity, it's meaning that, you know, you need to consider people of different ethnicities, people of different genders, and this kind of thing. It's not talking about including everyone from your university. Cool. Yes.
I'm not that I'm not yet go through the requirement of funding and everything.
Sure.
But when I saw the funding is so called as prioritized to low income, including Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, uh,
And
a-
Turkey, I
and
think.
so on. Is there any possibility, for example, the project is submitted together with kind of like a few different countries? For example, I have contact from Indonesia and from Vietnam, so perhaps it can show some, strengthening collaboration among Asia, and our intention is okay, or how it is going to be.
So, okay, I would say that would be a question to actually email the British Council and ask them. My own instinctive reaction, though, is that given the limited amounts of money available and that this is actually meant to initiate a research activity, if you're starting to include people from more than one university on each side, it's not going to be an effective use of the money. Right, you want to spend the money on actually doing the research. The greater the number of people involved, the more the money gets spread out, and it's only £100,000 maximum, right? So that's not going to go very far. That's enough to kickstart something between two universities, in my opinion. Now, if there's a sensible way of getting something going with a larger group of universities that makes sense in terms of getting the work done for the amount of money available, then maybe. But I think on the form, there will almost certainly be like a drop-down menu of which country is this activity going to be with. And it's not like you're going to be able to select 3, right? So I think that will be a question for the British Council. But that's my feeling. Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, yeah.
So in your part, I'm thinking, what kind of research area that you may very intend to collaborate with us? What kind of research resources in your part? You focus on which part?
Okay, well, I mean, we actually have a group within the engineering side of the School of PET, which actually does work on solar cells, including particularly it kind of ties in with the solid state physics group in that we have innovative materials in the solar cells. So we're looking at developing new, more efficient, more productive solar technologies. But of course, that isn't actually my own field of research. So if that's something that you would want to do, again, my response would be, drop me an email. I can put you in touch with the appropriate people at York, and hopefully you can get something going. But I don't want to, if you like, try and speak about a research field that is not my own, because that wouldn't really be sensible. Anyone else? Yes.
I have one question. I can see from your presentation showing that there is a Royal Society International, and after that SPF and private funding.
Yeah.
So under below SPF, there is a few listed grant. So basically, you focus on the British Council, right?
They're the only one. So the list you're talking about, I think, is that list. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what about the others? Is it we need to go to the website and looking for it, or is it just only
Well,
British Council? Just
I looked through all of their websites last night,
right. So the only one
and the only one that currently
open.
appears to have, I mean, I only looked from the perspective of the School of PET. So there may well be things in, I don't know, history or biology or something else, which I didn't look at. But from the standpoint of the School of PET and collaborations in physics and engineering and technology, the only one that to me looked like it would be viable was the one from the British Council. And that is typically how these things work. So you have to kind of keep checking. That's why I said partway through the talk that this isn't really ideal, because in order to kind of find out whether there is a call that's of interest to you, you have to go to each of these websites and have a little look around.
This is sort of example, basically, isn't it? I mean, they listed here.
Sorry?
This is like a so-called example that you list.
Well,
maybe we need to
I mean,
check.
one could say it's an example, except that it's the only example. So it's like the example because there aren't any other calls which are actually open to collaboration between the UK and Malaysia on physics, engineering, technology at the moment. So the reason I mention it is because it literally is the only one, right? Yeah.
Okay. Regarding to the area of nuclear.
Yeah.
Also just on that as well. And if somebody have experience or knowledge in computer simulation, office for nuclear. So can you advise us where to go in the nuclear area for computer simulation? We have like people like the Masa. So maybe
it depends on what you mean by nuclear computation, because that can mean so many different things.
Yeah, what kind of purpose that would be in this? What kind of area?
It depends what you're doing now, right? And it depends about the synergies with the UK groups.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you're doing, I don't know, work on exotic hexaquark nuclei in neutron stars, then the York Nuclear Physics Group would be a perfect match. But if what you're doing is development of compact fission reactors, then you'd probably be better off working with the University of Birmingham, right? So it just depends exactly what it is you're doing. I mean, nuclear simulation codes cover so many different areas. It's not clear without knowing exactly what the person is doing, where the best synergy would be with the UK group.
Now what I understand now, it's good to make the earlier establishment of networking with the group in UK, and then we can discuss it online, and from there, come up with very good proposal.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to find a proposal that actually makes sense in terms of doing something. I mean, what you often find, I mean, because I've been a referee on calls like this in the past, is that sometimes it looks like people have just put in an application because they want to get some money, but what they're actually wanting to do would be something that they could perfectly well do without the international partner. Well, then what's the point of applying for the money? You know, if it's something that you can do yourselves, why are you applying to work with the university in the UK? Vice versa, if it's something the university in the UK can do by itself, why is it asking for money to work with a university in Malaysia? It doesn't make any sense, right? It's, at the end of the day, this is not about making friends. I mean, hopefully that happens, but the point is to actually do some useful work, right? And so what they're looking for are applications that actually support you doing something that you can't do by yourself. Am I personally doing any? I mean, a lot of what I do is simulation, if you consider that to be theoretical work. So I do a lot of simulations of inertial confinement fusion. I mean, so my work is mainly involved with radiation hydrodynamics, shockwave hydrodynamics, radiation transport, thermonuclear burn physics, and areas like that. So one wouldn't have to, and indeed laser plasma interactions. One wouldn't need to be an expert in all of those things, but you would need to be an expert in at least one of those areas to really be able to realistically have a collaborative project with me personally. Because again, much as I would like to say work with I'll not be specific, but someone in this room, that's not going to get funding support unless it's clear that there is going to be something useful going in both directions, right? I'm not, this isn't funding for people from the UK to come out and teach you how to do things, or funding for people from Malaysia to come to the UK and teach us how to do something. This is for joint work. So you need an expert on both ends where there is a synergy between what they're trying to do. So an obvious one would be, let's say you're doing experiments using a high power laser. I can do simulations of your experiment, right? Which maybe you can't do yourself. Now, then you've got a super match, right? And then you can have a nice research proposal. But what wouldn't work, for instance, is you're interested in doing inertial confinement fusion, which is what I do. You're just interested in it. And you put in an application which basically says, we're interested in doing more of this, but we haven't done any at all so far. I mean, then what's that? How is that actually helping research in the UK? It's just a completely one-way stream of information in that case. And that's not what research grants are about. They're not training grants, right? They're trying to do something useful using expertise in two disparate countries. Now, it's fine if that information sharing and that participation is not completely balanced. I mean, the UK has got a longer, more established track record in physics than Malaysia does. That's just the fact of the matter, right? So you don't necessarily expect that it's going to be like 50% give from Malaysia and 50% give from the UK in terms of information sharing and all the rest of it. It could be 80-20. But there has to be some reason why the person in the UK would want to actually collaborate with the group in Malaysia more than just say that, well, the people are friends, or the person in the UK wants to come to Malaysia because they like the weather. You know, do you know what I mean? There has to be some research basis for actually having that collaboration.
I learned that York is one of the best surface science lab. Am I right?
Yeah, I believe so. It's not something that I've ever used, but yes.
To be honest, I think it's all this
Mhm.
so even in the chat now, we have one probably about 4 million initial expert machine. We have one
Mhm.
expert for the next one. So maybe from there, maybe I think have some opportunity to have collaboration with surface group, right?
Sure. Yes, potentially. And I mean, one thing I would add is that, you know, the practicality of a research proposal, it doesn't have to be, if you like, on a purely like theoretical learning type level. It can be something like, well, we'd like to do this in the UK, and you've got an instrument, which we also have that same instrument at facilities in the UK, but in the UK, that instrument is always oversubscribed, or it costs 10 times more to use it in the UK. So then it also makes sense. So it's about practicality. Does it make practical sense? So if you've got an instrument here that we can use without having to go through a long application procedure, right? Without having to spend a lot of money, then also that research activity can make sense, even if exactly the same instrument is sitting there in the UK, but you have to fill out a 30-page form to go anywhere near it, and you have to pay money to use it, then again, it can work. It's about what gets the research done, right? Indeed, yeah. And yeah, I mean, what they will be looking for, because it's what any government-funded research activity is looking for in terms of output, is 2 things. Publications, obviously, but the other one is what we call impact. Now, a large-scale impact will be something like a spin-off company, right? But that's a bit ambitious for a small grant like this, right? but that's the kind of thing they're thinking about. You know, it could be something which attracts industrial interest, that there's a potential for patenting something, not that you actually get to the point of having like a factory building things, but that it's moving in that, and that immediately is going to make the grant a lot more acceptable to the funding body. But I mean, to be honest, my thought is, because of the limited number of countries to which this call is actually open, a solid application which actually meets some of these criteria is likely to be well received. I don't think it's going to be that hard to get one of these.
I'm wondering, let's see one of the good informed dissertation have that kind, ISPF.
Mhm.
So what happens if we have something like patent? So who will declare patent? Is it your UK part or Malaysian part?
That I don't know. That I don't know. I mean, that gets very much into the legalities of these things. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that would work.
To the IP.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Prof. We have one more question.
Okay.
Okay. Regarding the ISPF, are there any restrictions or preferences for certain types of institutions or researchers? Also, how is the impact of the research measured?
So, okay. So where's the wording gone? It's somewhere here. Ah, there. Right. Okay. So in terms of requirements on the partners, so far as I'm aware, the only statement made is that they have to be leading or established researchers. So I'm not aware that there is any restriction in terms of the institution or the level. But in general, when they say leading or established, they mean someone who's got a permanent academic position. So probably not a PDRA. Okay. But yeah, that's the only, sorry, what was the rest of the question? I forgot.
How is the impact of the research
The
measured?
impact, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I would say here is that so UK funded grants don't work quite like what I've seen of Malaysia funded grants. Essentially, they give you the money and that's it, right? You don't have to then say we've done this with the money and we've done that with the money, and that, I mean, that's basically it. They give you the money, you do the research, that's it, done, right? That's how it works. So I mean, in terms of what would please the Research Council, publications and what we call impact, which generally means things that could lead to industrial engagement, but no one is going to kind of demand that you have produced those things. They give you the money, you go away and you do your stuff, right? So there isn't like a final report where you have to like write a 20-page document saying we did this and we did that. There's none of that. Okay, even if it's like a £5 million grant, there's none of that.
One more.
Yeah.
I tell a pitching idea for advance. And I know that gonna be a focus on CO2 capture. So in UK, is there any group working in the industry of law? Any group that work on the CO2 capture?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know who. I'm sure there is, but I do not know who. Yeah, no, because it's not my area. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any more questions from the floor? Okay. Right, that's the end of our today's session.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. John Richard Pasley, for giving your valuable information, especially on research grant, international research grant, British Council. Thank you. All right. I would like to invite our RMC Deputy Director, Dr. Saizam Rusidi, to give a token of appreciation to Dr. Richard. There's one more.
Malaysian Airlines starting an extra bag, I think.
Okay, all right, that's the end of today's session. Can we have our photo session? For online participant, can you please open the camera? For online participant, please open the camera. Okay, right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Can everyone online turn on your camera? We'll be taking pictures. Can we have a photo together here? Maybe at this side, maybe at this side. Everyone can sit, just sit down. Yeah. Yes. I think everyone can just sit down and then we take photo.
panjang belanja juga. Agak ada belanja tu. Yeah, ready? 1, 2, 3, one more. 1, 2, 3, start. 1, 2, 3, one more.